Oh, did he leave?
Let me see. Oh, he's there still. He probably just stepped away. He doesn't know I let him in. They'll come back.
What was I?
There we go.
What brilliant comment was I going to make? Oh, yeah, well, since like 64, and certainly.
Hi,
Good morning. Good morning.
Hi, I'm Claire. I'm Claire.
Hello, Claire.
This is Al. That's
Adrian.
Hi, Adrian.
Looks like a small group today.
It's just the four of us so far. I heard one more person was gonna come in, but this is who we are. Small but mighty.
Okay.
So let me do my little caveat that I started with, because I want you guys to know too.
Good morning.
Good morning, Adrian. This chapter deals with some really tough stuff. And so if you are very sensitive stuff, and so if you're feeling uncomfortable, please let us know. Okay? Because I hope we go deep into some of the things that we choose most of the time not to talk about. That makes sense? We have two. Before I really get into it, I want to talk about one thing, and that's that I have two movies that I think you might want to see. One of them is on Netflix. If you have Netflix, it's called Who We Are, and the subtitle is A Chronicle of Racism in America, and it was made last year or the year before by Jeffrey Robinson, and it is just magnificent. He tries to get into discussions with people in a number of different situations to try to deal with what is racism. And so very instructive to what we're doing here. The second one was a movie that I had not heard about until just this weekend. It popped up on my TV screen, and I said, oh, I'm gonna take that. And it's marvelous. It's by a favorite director, Agnes Varda. Do you know her? French documentarian, has done a lot of really good stuff, died a couple of years ago. But this was back in the early part of her career, 1968. She was given access to a Black Panther event. And so she is there talking, interviewing, filming Black Panthers in the middle of their strength time, right? As they're demonstrating to get, I think it's Huey Long out of jail. And so it's a very short movie. You can get it on YouTube, but definitely worthwhile to see. So The Black Panthers by Agnes Varda. This whole chapter is based on two laws passed by the House of Burgesses back in the 1600s. In 1662 was the law about all children born in this country shall be held bond or free only according to the conditions of the mother. And in 1682, the one that makes interracial marriage punishable by imprisonment. Two laws that I think were all about control and set the stage for most of the next 400 years in our relationships between races, and saying, giving permission to be able to own, to be able to control, and specifically in here, she deals a lot with controlling Black women and our ongoing failures in that area. So we were just kind of talking some about the different ones. Tell me what you guys think. What struck you as you read through this section?
I'd heard, about slavery and whatnot, and some of the conditions that the slaves labored under, but I didn't realize that sugar was the big thing initially.
Oh, you're on the next chapter. Sugar is the next chapter.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. The idea of controlling women, I think it was more like controlling the means of production.
Yeah.
The Blacks were a vital economic source to the South, to slaveholders. And the idea that a child born had to be relegated into slavery somehow.
Yeah.
And that law made it very, very apparent what direction that child was going to go in life as a slave. The other thing about the interracial marriage, again, that gets into the control of a means of production. If you have interracial marriage and a child is born, is that child automatically a slave?
Yeah.
And I think it defined, like you were saying, it really defined that, and it really put a strict boundary on things.
Yeah. The tough part about that is I on one side of things, efficiency, part of my mind says, well, I understand that. If you have to go steal children from the streets of Dublin, bring them over here to be indentured servants, but they know that they get to be released in 10 years. What do they do when they're here in America and they get released with whatever money you give them for their service? Well, they go and they buy their own land and they see the opportunity. That's not a sustainable system. You have to continue going and stealing more orphans off the street. So I understand from that perspective why they began to say, well, let's just enslave people. But you have to understand that without thinking about it morally. Because if you start thinking about it morally, what does it say? I was telling Claire earlier that two words have been going through my mind the whole time through this section. Christian nation. How do we say Christian nation and live this type of relationship to each other?
Well, look at the New Testament and even the words that Jesus and Paul had to say about what may or may not have constituted slavery back in that time.
Yeah.
Slaves, respect your masters.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all over the language. I mean, it's very easy for a Christian to say, oh, well, this is what my God, who I believe in, is commanding me to do. So I guess it is right for me to do it.
Except for that the slavery that was there was closer to the indentured servitude that they were moving away from.
Actually, that is great. That's a great sound. Before American slavery in the South, slavery was it was in a lot of the world, but was it passed on? Like, were children born slaves?
Okay.
Or was it just like for that person? And could they buy their way out? I mean, I think it was very different, but I don't.
Different depending upon cultural background and tribal, because the way that they would handle slavery in Africa tribal nations is differently than the way that, like, say, the Hebrews would handle slavery.
Yeah. So it's a very complicated answer because there's always been a lot of different things, but she said I think in the introduction, and she didn't go into it, so I don't know she said something like there were only 3 cultures that practiced slavery to this extent or in the way that the American South did. And I shouldn't say just the American South, the Americas, right? And I think there's always been what we called slaves, but it was a relative, the term I used earlier, indentured servitude, was a closer parallel to it. You were that person's servant, slave, if you will, for a certain amount of time, and then you were released. That was the more typical setup for what happened. But like I said, economically, it's much simpler if you can never have to release, never have to let go of your profit, right? If you have a built-in, not just a built-in steady workforce, but one that's growing. Because if you can take a woman and she has 4 kids, you've quadrupled your workforce.
Yeah.
So Economically, it makes really good
You
sense.
just want to take out ethics and morals, it's really easy to make the argument.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, tell me what else kind of struck you about this chapter? Anything else?
Well, one thing that really, that leapt out at
Chapter
me,
2.
it was so infuriating, was how how society, you know, to justify its treatment of Black women, to, you know, turn the victim into the perpetrator, and claim, you know, basically claim that she, you know, they were oversexed and they liked it, and it was they lured on the white men and it was their fault, and these attitudes, I think, continue to this day.
Yeah.
Not with everyone, of course, but just they, well, I mean, I think everybody knows about the missing white woman syndrome. And you have a pretty white teenager girl who is missing, and she'll be on the front pages and TV for months. Young Black teenager, you know, nothing.
Right.
And just, you know, well, I've read, I can't quote statistics and stuff, but just how juries are much less likely to find that a Black woman has been raped than a white woman.
Yeah.
Or sexually molested or sexually harassed, things like that. And, you know, I think it's a lot of it is still part of the culture.
Kind of what we were talking about earlier, that if what we're working towards is that we're all created equal, right now we do not have that. We might have it in our books, we might say that that's what's true, but in reality, we don't play that out. Black America as a whole takes much more than their fair share of the burden for crime in America. They are accused more often, they are convicted more often. Just this morning, I was watching a show, Black man about my age, that in 1980 was accused of killing a man and was convicted of it. 30 years later, he was released. 40 years later, he was released. But, you know, he's now 65, right? Looks like he's not any danger to society, but the state appealed that decision, and he's going to have to go back to jail. Now, why does the state need to appeal that decision? Why? Is the man still a danger to? But I wonder if that would have happened, if the same thing had happened to me, because I don't even think it would have happened, that false accusation. But let's say that it happened to me and I was released. I'm not certain that the state would have sought to put me back in.
You paid your dues.
Yeah, you know? But I think for whatever reason, maybe it's easier because when someone's poor, it is harder for them to fight any kind of legal process. Maybe it's a prejudicial, I better get them off the street because they're whatever they define as bad. Most of it, I think, racial.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that like I can drive in any neighborhood that I want to at 2 o'clock in the morning. And even with my goofy colored hair and my fingernail polish, nobody's gonna stop me.
Yeah.
But if I happen to be a Black guy wearing a knitted cap, and I just happen to be walking in a affluent neighborhood at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm gonna be stopped at least once, if not 3, 4 times, and maybe apprehended and arrested.
Yeah, and maybe like, what was his name? Who was going through a neighborhood and 2 people rounded him up with their trucks and killed him. That happens at too regular a pace.
Trayvon Martin too.
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry that I can't.
Yeah.
I might have been Trayvon Martin, yeah.
Well, Trayvon was the guy who the other guy shot with a stand your ground law.
Oh, that's right, that's another thing. So let's get into a heart of what she's talking about here, because what she's not talking about most of the time through here is Black men that are arrested too often and held too often. She is talking about Black women and treatment of Black women in America through the ages. And she draws a horrendous picture of what our legal system has allowed to be true towards that group of people, where rape was typical through the plantation days because it increased profit.
Yeah.
Right, it increased your workforce, where that perpetuated as we move forward. And it's hard to think that, it's hard for me to want to know that that is our truth of our past, because that doesn't sound very heroic. Yesterday we talked about American exceptionalism.
Yeah.
That does not fit within American exceptionalism.
Yeah, but that's your privilege though, and
That's a privilege.
that's my privilege.
Yeah.
Like, well, it doesn't feel right. Well, it's not supposed to feel right.
Right.
And it didn't feel right to countless of people who weren't even considered fully American for the first couple 100 years or
Full
so.
of human.
Fully human.
Fully human.
Fully
right.
human. Like you look at the 3/5 law. I mean, anyone who needs any kind of an argument about how deeply rooted racism is in our country only needs to look at the Constitution and the 3/5 law.
Yeah,
It's
Yeah.
gross.
yeah, where they wouldn't even name Black America, they just said anybody else is. And it's just horrible.
Yeah, five Black Americans equal 3 real human beings is what the 3/5 law states. If for anybody who couldn't remember or wasn't familiar, it's gross. It's just gross. And it's just, we cannot as a country and as white people be saying, well, we're done with the racism in America when the 3/5 law language is still in our Constitution.
Right. And when things like, did you see the piece where it was talking about marital rape, and said that those laws persisted in America until the 1970s,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Well, like the husband can basically have sex with his wife
That's
whenever
right.
he wants.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that he cannot be tried for rape. Now, that's not true anymore, but that's not very long away that went away.
It's just before I was born, and I'm 45, I was born in 77.
Yeah.
So we're talking 7 years before I was born. And that's just over 50 years that in our country, which is over 200 years old,
Right.
that men who are married, who are having their women raped, having their wives raped, could actually be tried for. That's
And how,
I think it indicates that our culture is evolving. We are progressing in a lot of ways. I just saw something this morning, speaking of when marital rape became illegal. It was just about 48 years ago, I think, that women could have a charge card.
yeah,
Up until that time, a woman could not have her own charge card.
yes,
silly, huh?
it's so dumb.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, Claire, you were talking about the shaming of the Black women and how hard it was for them to get a conviction of having been raped. I'm wondering which came first. We have that same thing now with white women who come forward alleging they've been raped. And there is that, it was the way she was dressed. She was asking for it. All of that stuff. And I'm wondering if that has grown out of the way Black women were treated, or if it was something that has always been in our society, societies, men
There's always been that,
in a patriarchy.
that woman as a slut. She's a whore the way she dresses. She's asking for it. It's not just a matter of race.
Yeah.
I doubt that very seriously.
Yeah, and I think it just gets augmented when you can look and see it's a Black woman, so she counts even less. But I think you're right that women as a whole bear much of the burden of having to prove what I as a man don't have to prove.
Yeah. Albert, have you heard of intersectional feminism?
No, I haven't.
That's addressing that very issue. So you have to look at intersectionality has to do with your privilege points and the intersections in which you experience less privilege. So I'm a male at birth. I consider myself to be gender fluid, but I was born a male. I was born white. I was born an American. So like I have three things, like I'm a male presenting white American. And if you are, let's say, a female presenting foreign born person of color, those three intersections impact you negatively based on the lack of privilege that you have. Because you're a woman, so there's a pinch point there. You're a person of color, there's another pinch point, and
Came from out of the country.
and you're a woman, you come from out of the country, and you're a person of color. So there are three intersections in which you are experiencing lack, where me, because of the way I was born, simply, I'm not experiencing all of those lacks. So for a woman who is born internationally and who is a person of color, there's a lot more microaggressions that are happening in their life that I will never be able to understand because I don't exist at those intersections.
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone has said, but I think the very conversation is showing how what Black women have to fight. We are supposed to be talking about enslaved Black women and how they were subjected to rape after rape after rape, and how the legacy has continued to this day.
Yeah.
And I am not belittling by any means what anyone else has to put up with, including, speaking as a woman, but I do not think any of it compares to what Black women just seem to have had it worse than anybody else.
Like a target on their whole lives.
Yeah.
I mean, at least the Black men slaves on the whole probably were not constantly raped and
Yeah.
had to bear children that they might see put on the block.
The auction block.
The auction.
Sold away, yeah.
It just tears me, like it like when I think, it takes my breath away when I think about, let's say that I was born a young Black child and I lived in a remote village somewhere in Africa, probably about 100 miles away from the closest clean drinking water. And what does my life look like? How soon is it going to be till our village gets ransacked and I get raped?
Although the reality is, I want to challenge you on this, because we, from American perspective, think that we were going into undeveloped nations in Africa and taking them, and we do that so that we can say, and we brought them to a better civilization.
No, God, yeah.
But the reality is that, but much of Africa was well developed and very civilized in many ways. We just chose to overlook that. And so we chose to decide that because they were of a certain color and they were brought in this way, that we could look down on them and we could call them lesser than.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be careful not to perpetuate that type of thing.
Well, sure. All I'm saying is like if that's your starting point, and we know of somebody could come in and rape her.
Yeah.
Somebody could, and then she has to have children, and those children get sold into slavery. She gets sold into slavery. This is her life. This is like, I don't, like, you're right. I don't want to sit and talk about how hard I, as a white male born person, has it when there's a woman who has basically been told that she's property and she doesn't have the right to even voice against the atrocities that are happening against her. It just makes me sad.
Al?
Um, I heard something the other day, a woman who is seeking the Republican running for president, said that if she were a Black person in the South looking at a Confederate monument, she would look at it and think, how lucky I am. See how well advanced I am because of these folk. And that just absolutely floored me. I was just mentioning to Adrian yesterday, there are two parts of my education that are totally lacking, or almost totally. I've had no music education, but I've had very little art education. But I remember one part of it and I can't remember what group it was in Africa. It was these beautiful statues, wood statues, I believe, that they made. And that got me to thinking that one of the reasons we can look at Africa and say, well, they had no culture, they weren't developed and whatnot. A lot of what they did, they built with wood and mud. And those things don't last forever. We built, or Europeans built, with stone and marble. And those things have lasted for eons. So if we look at what people have created that we can still see, yeah, Europeans seem much more advanced than people from other parts of the world.
Yeah.
But the bottom line now is the biggest reason why we look at other spaces and think lesser than is because we're choosing not to see. There's a book called 1491. Do you know that book?
Mm-hmm.
It's the story of what were the Americas like before 1492. All right. And what it shows is incredible civilization, incredible things that they were doing, ways that they were improving their spaces, but we tend to not think of them as being advanced because we wanted to see them as worthy of our dominance. We had to come and save them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the same thing applies to Black Americans. Is I think the way that, at least one of the ways that they excuse this, the Black enslaver who raped his slave, was saying, oh, I'm bringing her to a better place. I can think about Thomas Jefferson with Sally Hemings saying, yeah, I'm making her more than what she could have been.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, he was satisfying his sexual hunger with her. And maybe he gave something to her kids, because he sure didn't give much to her, but he freed her 4 adult children when he died. But that's a pretty arrogant space to sit in. And I think we do that. The biggest issue right today, I think, in Black-white relations is that we are continuing to hold most of Black America in economically, socially very small spaces, very limited spaces. And until that's addressed, until we work hard at addressing that, we're not going to solve some of these issues. Because in economically low areas, crime grows.
Yeah.
In economically low areas, you have difficulty figuring out how to get out. What do you do to get out of a poor neighborhood?
Yeah.
You sell drugs, you join a gang, you do some of the things that are socially unacceptable, but that at least give you an opportunity to get beyond.
Yeah.
And then we look down on that, and we look down on Black women. Instead, how are we doing something that reverses that? Back in the late 60s, maybe 68 or so, Ossie Davis, do you remember him, a movie actor?
Yeah.
Okay. But I think his best work was not his acting, it was his directing. And he made a movie called Black Girl. And it follows a family, Medea, the grandmother, mom, and 3 kids, 2 by 1 father, and then the little sister who's by the second father, was just together for a short time, and which convinced mom that she was failing at relationships, and that all her girls, those 3 girls, were failures. And so she began reaching out to other girls in the neighborhood and helping them. And so, and held these stepdaughters, if you will, up as the model of how she did things right. Oh, I finally succeeded with them because I failed with all 3 of you. And she would say it that clearly in this movie. And Ossie Davis, I think, is saying in this, as a Black man, he's saying, this is what we often grew up with, is how did we pass on whatever kind of stories about who we were and who we weren't. So that stepdaughter who had gone off to college, where the other girl was pregnant and the other girl was angry at the whole world, and this other one was trying to find her way. How did she succeed with the other students? Well, it doesn't really go into that, but it showed the relationship between the stepdaughter who had gone away and the youngest daughter, and how she tried to empower her, and at the end she left the younger daughter to go be with her stepsister, because that stepsister showed some kind of way out. And how do we participate in that way out space? Because I think that's one of the biggest roadblocks, is that they can't see something beyond what they already know.
Oh, yeah, I would agree, but there's no like one easy answer. It would be so nice to say, this is what you do, A, B, C, and D.
Right.
And it's society, it's endemic,
It is.
it's poverty, it's bad schools, it's
Right.
constant prejudice. I mean, the list is endless, and I don't know where to start. I wouldn't know where to start, except I think you try to improve everything maybe a little.
So I'll give you one way to do it. Advertisement time. You ready for an advertisement?
Let's do it.
Yesterday, I sat at 8 o'clock in a board meeting of an organization I'm a part of. It's called Job Path. Anybody heard of Job Path?
No.
Okay, you need to know this organization. Started by PCIC in conjunction with city and state. And here's essentially what it does is, city and county. It essentially says, how do we make a path to job for people?
Mhm.
And the goal is, if someone's income level at the beginning is like here, to raise them up here. And they have marvelous success rates. I think it's very close to $50,000 increased income from beginning a program to end.
Nice.
And essentially what it is we work with Pima College and other educational institutions to be able to get these people into programs, nursing programs, into drafting programs, into aviation programs, so that they can have the economic means to be able to step beyond things. And so I think you have to find a program like that. Or here's my advertisement: donate to Job Path, because they're doing it right and well, right?
I'll write it down.
Yeah,
No,
job-
that sounds very practical,
Yeah. Yeah, and these are primarily women and mostly women of color. And so just try to find those programs where we don't do it for them, but we support them in their doing are important. Because what you ultimately want is not someone who you get through school, but someone who gets themselves through school and succeeds, and then has the ability to move beyond whatever it is that's been holding them back. And there's a lot that holds a Black woman back in America still today.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that's what we're trying to solve. So end of advertisement, but donate anyway. And if you need information, I'll get you information about them, so.
John.
I think another thing that happens in our society is our terms, our words that we use, our attitudes. Police have been coming under fire recently. Years ago, late 70s, I had a communications professor who pointed out to us that we, at that time, looked at policemen as the guardians of our safety, the people that kept our community safe and crime-free or whatever. But he said, think of the Black person living on the other side of the tracks, police to them were an occupying force.
Yeah.
And we have that term police action, like in Korea, whatever. And we don't think of the police action as being something that's going to be beneficial necessarily. Words are just,
Especially,
I think,
yeah, especially
ahead.
if you saw some of the statistics she said, and I can't find it right now. But didn't she have something where she said that in like a 4-year term, something like 1,000 police officers had been, their jobs had been terminated because they had some kind of forced sexual encounter. Something like that. I'm sorry that I can't find the specific. That's just horrible that it's anywhere close to that.
Yeah.
That somehow our police officers are seeing it as okay to take advantage of. I know where it's at. It's right here.
And again, I think that's an indication that our society is evolving. You mentioned that number in that period of time. Going back 4 or 5 decades, did that stuff not occur? Or did it occur, but it just wasn't dealt with?
Yeah. It's terrible, isn't it, that we even have to have any incidents of that. And it's even more horrible that we really don't know about it. And so we're not doing anything about it. And that to me is chosen ignorance. Even if you didn't yourself choose it, society has chosen that to hide much of that from us. And we chose not to delve deeply because that's our privilege, to not have to deal with the fact that it's doing that.
Yeah, it's real easy to like just pay attention to our day to day and just get through our days and not worry about like what's going on in Compton or what's going on in a small town outside of somewhere in Georgia or in Mississippi. I remember when I lived in Collierville, Tennessee, and we took a 90-minute drive into Mississippi from Collierville. And it was like, my mom said it was like going back in time because you were going and seeing all these old one-room rickety shacks.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, this might have been a fun little sightseeing privilege for us, but there's a family that's living in that one-room
That's right.
shack. And they're just, it's not a tourist attraction.
And too often, Mike, it's Miguel.
It's fine.
Yeah. So too often it's like the story of Celia. We were talking about Celia earlier, who was being raped repeatedly, was essentially bought in order to be the object of this man's rape. Right?
Yeah.
And finally clubbed him to death. And an all-white jury found her guilty. And I think that all of that describes what I think goes on way too often, is we sit in a space where we hear a story, well, she's just not capable of doing it, you know, she's the wrong one here, she shouldn't have killed him.
Yeah.
When we should be saying, why was she being raped repeatedly? Why do we have a system that allows that to ever happen? And what are we doing about that system? And I told Claire that I hope that as the noose was putting around her neck, I hope that she was proud of what she'd done. And I hate to say that because I don't want to say that you want to be proud of killing her. I think that that's an appropriate response.
Yeah.
I think you were mentioning at the beginning the 2 laws passed there in Virginia about interracial marriage and the status of a child born depended upon the status of the mother. And I look at a lot of the laws we have and we kind of hide behind the law. Well, this happened and the law says, and therefore that's all we have to worry about. We don't have to worry about why someone did something. We don't have to change or work on our society to get to a space where people aren't doing things we don't appreciate. We just have the law there. We just got done watching a documentary about the Nuremberg trials. And it was audio. They had recorded the entire, I think they had, 2,000 LP recordings of the testimonies and whatnot during the trial. And it came coming up that, well, basically that's what the laws were. And that's why it was okay for people to go along with the law in Germany. And now we see, like in Florida, they're passing all these laws about what teachers can teach and not teach and so forth. I'd heard about a teacher there who had taken a photograph of a row of bookshelves that were completely empty and making the statement basically that this is what we're allowed to use now, because somebody's going to have some heartburn with something in any of the books that used to be there. And that teacher was summarily fired for having done that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's almost as if we're afraid that what it is we're trying to hold on to won't stand up if people get any other ideas around it.
Yeah.
Is that like stupid? Because if my thing is the right answer, I shouldn't have to be afraid that something else will be able to take it down. It should be able to stand on its own. And yet we've done a whole bunch of protecting ourselves from any assault on. I think
Yeah.
we know that it will not stand.
Yeah.
And that fear is what drives much of this. We talked about power a little bit earlier, and I think power is a lot of this, but the other side is fear. And fear is something that people just won't admit to.
And nobody wants to. Yeah.
No, we do a whole lot of the no fear t-shirt type of thing.
Oh, God, yeah.
As if that's a value. And I don't think no fear is a good value for us to hold on to. I think that fear has its place. It's our relationship to fear that's important. And if we don't admit to it, then we don't have no fear. We have ignorance of.
And people are just wanting you to be afraid of the wrong things. Well, be afraid of what Jesus will do to you if you don't become a member of the flock. Well, you know what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid of what our country is going to look like if we don't really do something to stop the oppression of marginalized people. That's what I'm afraid of.
And for me, it's this. I'm afraid that we're not going to step into our full humanity until we begin seeing the full humanity of everyone around us.
How are we supposed to be image bearers if we see so many image bearers as less than the image, supposedly? And that's what all the racism is. Yeah.
But that's convenient, Mike, Mikhail, that's why. It's convenient, it's just not necessarily what God is calling us into. And what even if we take God out of the equation, what a good civilization should be, right? If we look at people around us, should we be looking at some as 2/5, like you said? If we're looking at full and good communities, should we be looking at women as, you know, like what was said about Celia was that she didn't fall within the category of any woman, right? How can we even say that? And yet that was the legal justification for her hanging. And how can we continue to perpetuate that and call ourselves a full, complete, good nation? And yet we've told that you know, miraculous story of the starting of America as if everything there was only God ordained. Yeah. Instead of telling a much better story of human beings did remarkable work, even though they were very flawed. Because I think being flawed is not a disqualifier from doing what God wants in the world. But if you're doing what God wants in the world, it doesn't give you perfection either.
No.
And I think that's the story we told. I think to our own detriment. So what do we do about it? What do we do today? Because we can't go back and save Celia. We can't go back and fix what Thomas Jefferson did with Sally Hemings. We can't go back and change the laws of the House of Burgesses, right? What do we do today to fix it?
I think one very quick thing that could help I've noticed all my life, Black women are not treated with the same respect as white women.
That's right.
Black women are seldom called Miss or Ma'am when you talk to them in, like, if they're a waitress, or if they're a clerk, or if they're at the grocery store. They just, I think they grow up with not, again, I'm trying not to generalize. I know, not every Black woman has been treated like this.
But
I think
it's pretty good. Yes,
And I think courtesy goes a long way. And I think if we just made a conscious effort to treat Black women not nicer, but just as nicely or just as politely as we treat other women or men, it might make the country a lot better eventually, at least people not here.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, just the fact that we skipped over the section about sterilizations, just the fact that they had that many sterilizations. And she devoted several pages to that, and she posited that the federal government is still paying for between 100 and 150,000 sterilizations every year right now. Now, some of those might be warranted, some of those might be wanted by people, but the stories of the past were like the story of the two girls, right? Preteen girls who were sterilized because the state forced mom to put an X on the permission slip.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And to think that we have that big of a legacy, and that's one where you can't do reparations well, because you don't know what that woman would have done with her reproductive freedom that was taken away from her.
Yeah.
Right? Would she have had 1 kid, 10 kids? Would it have been the joy of her life or the burden of her life? We don't know, right?
Yeah.
And yet we stole that in so many cases and felt justified in the stealing.
Yeah.
I think for me, and this is me, but like one of the things that I try to do when I have that question of, well, what do I do next? What do I do with all this? I first and foremost always try to listen to anybody that's in my life, whether it be friend or an acquaintance or whatever. If they're a person of color and they're speaking about these things in which they've been victimized, I don't ever want to be the person telling them that what they feel they've experienced is incorrect. I want to listen to their story, and then when they're done, and I want to ask, like, is there anything actionable that I can do to help with this? And then if they tell me, write somebody, give money to these organizations, and I'm going to find a way to do that kind of thing. That's really the best way, I think.
Well, and I think one of the big things that you hit upon is, while there's things that we need to do legislatively and whatnot,
Yeah.
I think the interpersonal stepping into lives is essential. Because if you don't sit in a person's life and see this Black woman in front of you as a full human being, then I think you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
And the problem is that our privilege makes it very easy for us not to have to,
Yeah.
right?
Well, they're just like, well, they're just like us. She's just gonna be just like me. She has the same people in her life that I do that are speaking life into her. I don't know that,
You don't.
and I shouldn't assume that.
Yep.
I should be as kind as I possibly can to every single person that I possibly can.
And what you want to do is hear her story and
Yeah.
why it is that she is what she is, how she's made the choices that she made, and what are the barriers in front of her.
Yeah.
Because if you think the barrier is education, but for her it's something very different, then you don't want to send money to education to her, if that's not what she wants and needs.
Yeah.
And being able to be in a relationship with her is essential.
Yeah.
And hopefully more than just one her.
So many of them.
Yeah.
Out there. Yeah.
And the hard part is that if you're in privilege, sometimes what you get to, the people you get to meet are Black people of privilege, and that's really not who you need to talk to. You need you need to be in a space where, a very different space than just that.
Yeah.
But that takes very intentional effort.
It does, and it also, like, you gotta be careful. You don't wanna be going down to the inner city looking like some white Jesus.
Right.
Well, I'm gonna go and help these Black kids. No, don't do that.
That's the difficulty.
You know, really, you just start looking at people as human beings and like, hey, this person's obviously going through, if you see something on social media that was written by somebody who's obviously going through something, instead of coming away, seeing the headline and saying, oh, I've got my own personal opinion about this, read what they're saying.
Yeah, read what they're saying.
Read what they're saying, look into the background, and then come away with your opinion and see if there's something that maybe you could do to offer them some sort of helping hand.
The good news is that we don't have to solve this today.
We won't solve
Maybe,
it
maybe
today.
next week.
By the third chapter, we should have it down, I think, right?
Well, and too often that has been white America's thing is let's figure out something simple to be able to fix it. And it is a decades, a centuries long issue that will take time. Yesterday in class, I said something about my belief is, although it goes like this, that we're going, that we're on an upward trajectory.
It was like this.
And then I had to repeat myself. I had to correct myself because I don't think we're on an upward trajectory like this. It's more like this.
Unfortunately, I think you're right.
It's a slow process and it's a difficult process and it is one that will not be solved completely in our lifetime, but we have to be involved in it.
Yeah.
Right? And if it's one person that you talk to, maybe that's enough, right?
It's enough for today.
It's enough for today. And
It's one person that feels heard. It's one person that now has a different attitude tomorrow. Oh, there's somebody who actually.
are you talking about yourself? or
No, I'm
the
talking
person
about the other person.
No, I'm just kidding.
Well,
But
but
the truth
they
of
could
that
be
is
me too.
maybe it's me who needs to have that attitude.
Well, I'm saying it's like, it's one person who has a different, it's not like that I'm right, but it's, oh, that person listened to me.
That person listen.
That person actually took the time to listen to me. Now I have more confidence that the next time that I need to speak my needs, somebody else will listen to me. They have a little bit more in the tank.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just a tiny bit more, but I mean, it's something,
Yeah.
you know?
So thank you for your time today. Sorry that we've still got lots to talk about, but I'm pretty happy that we have lots to talk about still. So next week we're talking about sugar and about New Orleans and what happened there with a whole different commodity in that area. We will see you in a week.
Thank you, Jim.
Take care. Thank you
Nice
very much.
talking.
I will have to go. We'll have to go there. I just can't.
Yeah.